Hi.
Hi again. We're in the Pure Worship book, and we have reached the section where they're dealing with chapter 34 of Ezekiel. And when you look at the 2 pages that they devote that's not even the end of it, but the 2 pages we're looking at today in the Pure Worship book, which are pages 90 and 91, just over onto page 92, you realize even though they are referring to the whole chapter and throughout the chapter, from the beginning to the end, they only actually reference less than a half of the verses.
Yeah.
For some reason, they leave out more than half of the verses. So we're going to read the whole chapter as is in the New World Translation.
Yeah.
And I have the ESV in front of me. But Vivian will highlight the verses they leave out.
Yeah. So
And then
I'll
we'll talk
tell
about
you
why.
what's in and what's out of their literature. So that 34, they tell you to read 1 to 6, which is, "The word of Jehovah again came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to the shepherds, This is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding themselves. Is it not the flock that the shepherds should feed? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, and you slaughter the fattest animal, but you do not feed the sheep or the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bandaged the injured, or brought back the strays, or looked for the lost. Rather, you have ruled them with harshness and tyranny. So they were scattered, because there was no shepherd. They were scattered and became food for every wild beast of the field. My sheep were straying on all the mountains, on every high hill. My sheep were scattered over all the surface of the earth, with no one searching for them or seeking to find them." So they like that part because it's against somebody else.
Yes, this is a condemnation of the shepherds of Israel, who are obviously very selfish and scatter the sheep, are cruel to the sheep. So, of course, that is essential to their argument that God abandoned Israel.
Yeah.
So it's very clear why they want all 6 of those verses in. But as soon as we get to the application or to the solution of the problem, that's where they run into problem.
Although they're telling their shepherds not to behave like these shepherds.
In the book they are, yeah.
Yeah, but do they do that? Do they seek out the strays and look for the lost? I don't think so. They actually cut you off and make sure you stay lost.
But we don't want this to turn into a rant, right?
Okay.
Why do they leave out the next few verses until they get to verse 10? This is what it's left for us to figure out.
Okay, so 7 to 9 they don't mention. "Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of Jehovah. As surely as I am alive, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah, because my sheep have become prey, food for every wild beast of the field, for there was no shepherd, and my shepherds did not search for my sheep. Rather, they kept feeding themselves, and did not feed my sheep. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of Jehovah."
Well, you might say, well, they left that part out because it's kind of a repetition of the first part. Okay. But why did they start at verse 10 again?
Okay, so 10 says, "This is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. I am against the shepherds, and I will demand an accounting of them for my sheep, and I will dismiss them from feeding my sheep, and the shepherds will no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my sheep from their mouth, and they will no longer be food for them."
Okay, so it's all so far about how bad the shepherds of Israel were. And yet we have the part of the solution in this verse too, which is, I will rescue my sheep from their mouths.
Yeah.
Now, in the book, their application of all of this in the subsequent verses is, well, God raised up a organization in the last days. So they spend most of their time over in the 2 paragraphs
Yeah.
on page 91 talking about 1914, 1919, and God's organization, the spiritual paradise that God's people have been in since 1919.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, that's not here at all. So again, it's the narrative being read right into the text. But the beginning of the solution, and by the way, this text did mean a lot to me in my re-examining my faith as an elder. I began to see that the solution to bad shepherding is not replace the shepherds with other human shepherds. The solution is to have a divine shepherd.
Yeah.
And that's stressed in the next few verses. So they leave out all of the next part.
So 11 to 20, what is it? To 21, they don't say anything about. So I'll read that. For this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. Here I am, and I myself will search for my sheep, and I will care for them. I will care for my sheep like a shepherd who has found his scattered sheep and is feeding them. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered in the day of clouds and thick gloom. I will bring them out from the peoples and collect them together from the lands and bring them into their land and feed them on the mountains of Israel, by the streams and by all the dwelling places of the land. In a good pasture I will feed them, and the land where they graze will be on Israel's high mountains. They will lie down there in a good grazing land, and they will feed on choice pastures on the mountains of Israel. I myself will feed my sheep, and I myself will make them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah. The lost one I will search for. The stray I will bring back. The injured I will bandage, and the weak I will strengthen. But the fat one and the strong one I will annihilate. I will feed that one with judgment. As for you, my sheep, this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. I am about to judge between one sheep and another sheep, between the rams and the male goats. Is it not enough for you to feed on the very best pastures? Must you also trample the rest of your pastures with your feet? And after drinking the clearest water, must you foul the water by stomping with your feet? Should my sheep now feed on the pasture trampled by your feet, and drink the water befouled by the stamping of your feet? Therefore this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says to them. Here I am, and I myself will judge between a fat sheep and a lean sheep. For with your flank and shoulder you kept pushing, and with your horns you kept shoving all the sick ones, until you had scattered them abroad.
So we might pause right there to say, what's the reason these verses have been left out? Well, several.
Yeah.
The main one being, where does this all happen?
In Israel.
And the mountains of Israel. Explicitly said, what, more than twice?
Yeah.
The mountain heights of Israel. And the emphasis is upon God himself doing all of this, though. I count from verse 10 through verse 21, I count 18 times he says, I myself will do it. And it's emphatic in the New World Translation. I myself, even I, in the older version.
Yeah.
I myself, even I. The way it says it in here, in the ESV, from verse 15 onwards. I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep. I myself will make them lie down, declares Yahweh God, Yahweh Elohim. I will seek the lost. I will bring back the strayed. I will bind up the injured. I will strengthen the weak. And the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them in justice. So if there's 18 references to God as the one who will do all of this, and 7 of them are within 2 verses here. 15 and 16.
Yeah.
Could it be more emphatic that God himself is the solution to Israel's problem?
Yeah.
It's not that he will take away the bad shepherds and replace them with other fallible, sinful shepherds,
Yeah.
which is
And-
the solution Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to believe.
He is identifying himself as a good shepherd. But in the New Testament, Jesus is called the good shepherd as well. So, that is what a Christian sees that a witness doesn't see.
Yeah. So the solution, according to God himself in chapter 34, is not more mortal shepherds. It's a divine shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether you want to believe that Jesus Christ therefore is Yahweh is another issue. But the point is, Yahweh says, I will be the shepherd of my sheep. You do what you want with that. Mm-hmm. What I had to do with it is fit it into my overall belief system. I had to admit that a mortal, even an immortal shepherd who is a creature, which is our Watchtower Jesus Christ, is not capable of being the good shepherd who you can rely on for eternity.
Yeah.
It has to be a divine shepherd.
Hmm.
And that's made a bit of a problem in the next 3 verses. The ones they want you to read, though, are 22 to 24. That's the ones they suggest you read.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think they refer to right down to 28.
The only ones they actually suggest you read, though, are 22 to 24.
Oh, okay. So 22 to 24 says, "And I will save my sheep, and they will no longer become something to prey upon. And I will judge between a sheep and a sheep. I will raise up one shepherd over them, my servant David, and he will feed them. He himself will feed them and become their shepherd. And I, Jehovah, will become their God, and my servant David, a chieftain among them. I myself, Jehovah, have spoken."
Now, why did they leave out the subsequent verses? I think we can see again there's a very good reason to leave out 25 and beyond.
Okay, so you want me to read 25
Sure.
to the end? "I will make a covenant of peace with them, and I will rid the land of vicious wild beasts, so that they may dwell securely in the wilderness and sleep in the forests. I will make them and the area around my hill a blessing, and I will cause the rain to fall at the proper time. Blessings will pour down like the rains. The trees of the field will yield their fruit, and the soil will give its produce, and they will dwell securely on the land. And they will have to know that I am Jehovah when I break their yoke bars and rescue them from those who enslaved them. They will no longer become something for the nations to prey upon. The wild beasts of the earth will not devour them, and they will dwell in security, with no one to make them afraid. I will establish for them a plantation of fame, and they will no longer die from famine in the land, and they will no longer be humiliated by the nations. Then they will have to know that I, Jehovah, their God, am with them, and that they, the house of Israel, are my people, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah. As for you, my sheep, the sheep that I care for, you are but men, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah."
I am your God. So it's very clear he's talking to Israel, who are sheep scattered by bad shepherds who are Israelites.
Preyed
Both the sheep
upon
and the
by the
shepherds are
nations.
Israelites, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They've left out, therefore, all the verses by which this becomes clear that the people being talked about here are not Jehovah's Witnesses. They are Israel, regathered from their millennia-long scattering.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very obvious why they chose verses 22 to 24 to refer to, because there they have Jehovah shepherding Jehovah's Witnesses, and David, who is for them, of course, Christ, which I agree with. He is Christ, but how could a mortal Christ be a faithful shepherd, a good shepherd?
Yeah.
And that's what a witness has to wrestle with if he's going to be understanding. It doesn't have to agree with what Christendom concludes from this, namely that the divine shepherd has to become a human shepherd. But the very fact that is referred to as David is a reference to his earthly destiny, that he will be a literal king in a literal place here and throughout.
So I think what we need to highlight, though, is what they find in the whole of the text. And the thing that struck me is when they, in paragraph 20, they've got how the prophecy is fulfilled. And then halfway down they go, in 1914, God installed Jesus as king and entrusted him with the responsibility to shepherd and feed God's sheep on earth. 1914, not in the text. Then it says, shortly afterwards, in 1919, the newly enthroned king appointed the faithful and discreet slave to feed the domestics. That's not in the text. 1919's not in the text. Him assigning a faithful and discreet slave to feed the domestics, they're just jumping all over the place and just putting their own interpretation. Plus, several times in this passage, they talk about paradise as either a spiritual paradise that exists within them or a global paradise.
So we can agree.
That's not in the text either.
We can agree with them that there is a reference to a literal paradise in here, but it's very obviously in a certain place. It's not a global paradise. There's no reference to a spiritual paradise, although there is a reference to a restoration.
Or an invisible king.
Or an invisible king. The son of David to a Jew and to the church is a human being, and he was not only a human being incarnate, that is, not an angel incarnate, he was a human being, a true human being who was raised from the dead, still a human being, but albeit a glorified human being. Mm-hmm. That's been the teaching of the church for 2,000 years. The Watchtower has abandoned that teaching. Mm-hmm. And they've got a hybrid then. They've got partly literal fulfillment, partly spiritual fulfillment. Yeah. Whereas in the text it's very obvious this is a reference to a literal place and a literal people.
So do you have some links?
Yes. We've got a link to our discussion of Genesis chapter 18. Yahweh appears, talks, eats, and walks with Abraham. Mm-hmm. And also a link to the Paradise Lost playlist, which is 19 videos all wrapped around the theme of what do we do with all the paradise texts that are in, well, almost all of them are in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm. That are used by the witnesses.
Used by the witnesses to prove that that's the good news for the great crowd of other sheep today. Mm-hmm. See you next time.
Okay.